A loud school bully puts his hand on a quiet Filipino girl in a crowded hallway, thinking she will freeze like always. She doesn't shout. She doesn't fight back. She just looks at his hand and starts counting. 10 seconds later, the entire school is staring at him on the floor, realizing they never knew who she really was. She moved through the school the same way every morning. Quiet, steady, unnoticed. The Filipino girl kept her head slightly down, not out of fear, but out of habit. Hallways were loud places, full of voices trying to be heard. She had learned early that survival did not always belong to the loudest. Sometimes it belonged to the ones who knew how to disappear. Her routine never changed. She arrived early, walked the same path, sat in the same seat. She spoke only when spoken to, and even then, briefly. Teachers described her as polite. Classmates described her as shy. Most didn't describe her at all. She was simply there, like a background detail no one bothered to focus on. She wore simple clothes. Nothing branded. Nothing loud. Her backpack was always zipped. Her books neatly stacked. During group work, she was the one who listened. When jokes were made at her expense, she smiled lightly or pretended not to hear. Not because it didn't sting, but because reacting always made things worse. People mistook her calm for weakness. They mistook her silence for fear. There were whispers sometimes. Comments about her accent, her lunch, her last name. Never loud enough to cause trouble. Just enough to test boundaries. She didn't respond. She kept walking. That was the strategy. Stay invisible. Get through the day. Go home. In her culture, she had been taught that respect came first. That you didn't raise your voice unless it was necessary. That dignity was not something you demanded, it was something you carried quietly. Those lessons followed her into the building every morning. To most students, she was an easy target. Not because she did anything wrong, but because she did nothing at all. She didn't push back. She didn't perform confidence. She didn't try to prove herself. And in a place where attention was currency, that made her seem small. The confident students didn't even see her as competition. The louder ones barely registered her presence. When someone brushed past her shoulder too hard, they didn't apologize. When a comment landed a little too close to insult, they laughed it off. No consequences followed. She accepted it with the same calm expression every time. What no one noticed was how aware she was. How she tracked space. How she stood balanced without thinking. How her breathing never changed, even when tension rose. They didn't know about the discipline behind the silence. They didn't know how much restraint it took to stay quiet. They didn't know that invisibility was a choice, not a limitation. To them, she was just another quiet girl blending into the crowd. Weak, easy, forgettable. And for a long time, that was exactly how she wanted it. Until someone decided to test how quiet really meant how powerless. It didn't start with shouting. It never did. At first, it was small enough that most people missed it. A comment said just loudly enough to be heard. A laugh that lingered too long. A pause in conversation when she walked by, followed by a smirk. The kind of behavior that could always be explained away if someone asked questions. He had confidence. That was the thing people noticed first. He spoke easily. Teachers trusted him. Other students followed him without thinking. When he joked, people laughed. When he pushed boundaries, people looked away. He had learned early that if you acted like you belonged at the center, most people would let you stay there. His attention toward her became a routine. In the hallway, he'd slow his steps just enough to block her path, forcing her to stop or adjust. In class, he'd repeat something she said under his breath, twisting it into a joke that earned quiet laughter. During lunch, he'd comment on her food, her silence, her accent. Always framed as curiosity, never cruelty. Not on the surface. She never reacted. That only encouraged him. Each time she stayed quiet, he took it as permission. Each time she kept walking, he pushed a little further. The behavior became predictable. Monday comments. Wednesday jokes. Friday humiliation disguised as humor. Weeks passed, and the pattern settled in. Other students noticed. They always did. But noticing was where it ended. Some looked uncomfortable. Some pretended to check their phones. Some told themselves it wasn't serious enough to step in. It was easier to stay neutral than to challenge someone with social weight. Teachers were around, always nearby, but nothing happened in a way that demanded intervention. No raised voices, no obvious conflict, just enough control to make sure she felt it, and just enough restraint to avoid consequences. He liked that balance. He liked knowing she would lower her eyes instead of meeting his. He liked that she never called him out. He liked the quiet power of knowing he could interrupt her day whenever he wanted. To him, it wasn't bullying. It was entertainment. It was control without effort. A reminder that status mattered, and silence meant surrender. To her, it was something else. She noted the times, the places, the way the crowd reacted or didn't. She noticed how quickly laughter faded once he walked away, how quickly the hallway returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. She learned which corners had cameras, which teachers looked up, which didn't. Weeks went by like this. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, nothing that would make a scene, just pressure. Repeated, deliberate, testing limits. And with every ignored moment, he grew more confident, more comfortable, more careless. Because when control goes unchallenged for long enough, it begins to feel permanent. And that was when he made the mistake of believing it always would be. To most people, her silence fit neatly into a story they already believed. It was easier that way. They told themselves she was quiet because she lacked confidence, that her politeness came from wanting to please, that the way she avoided eye contact meant she was intimidated. No one asked her. No one waited long enough to find out. Assumptions filled the space where curiosity should have been. He believed it more than anyone. When she stepped aside instead of arguing, he saw submission. When she said, "Excuse me," instead of pushing back, he heard apology. When she lowered her voice, he assumed fear. It confirmed what he already thought, that some people were simply easier to control than others. Others shared the same quiet conclusions. She was labeled nice, soft-spoken, traditional, words that sounded harmless, even respectful, but carried expectations underneath them. Expectations that she would endure, that she would adapt, that she would not resist. Her background became part of that misunderstanding. People spoke about it in fragments. Her last name, the food she brought from home, the way she thanked teachers, the way she never raised her voice, even when interrupted. All of it fed into a single idea, that she had been raised to accept whatever was given to her. No one noticed the discipline in her routine. No one questioned the way she stood so balanced, even in crowded hallways. No one wondered why she never flinched when voices rose. When comments were made about her culture, they were disguised as jokes. When stereotypes appeared, they were framed as observations. And when she didn't respond, people assumed agreement. He used that silence as proof. "You're always so calm," he once said, smiling as if it were a compliment. "Must be nice not getting worked up about things." She didn't correct him, not because he was right, but because correcting him would require explaining something he wasn't ready to hear. What he didn't know was that calm was something she had practiced. That control was something she had learned intentionally. That restraint was not her default, it was her discipline. There were moments, brief and easy to miss, when the mask slipped. A shift in posture when someone stood too close. A steady gaze that held longer than expected. A pause before movement, as if she were measuring space instead of reacting to it. Small details that meant nothing to people who weren't paying attention. Her past stayed carefully buried. Not out of shame, but out of choice. It belonged to a different place. A different chapter. One shaped by structure, repetition, and lessons learned the hard way. She carried it quietly, the same way she carried everything else. He mistook her patience for passivity, her manners for obedience, her silence for surrender. And because everyone around him made the same mistake, no one corrected him. They didn't see the depth behind the stillness. They didn't recognize the difference between someone who couldn't fight back and someone who was choosing not to. They only saw what they expected to see. And in doing so, they underestimated her in the most complete way possible. by believing they already understood her. That belief made him careless. And carelessness, when paired with false confidence, has a way of exposing the truth. It happened between classes, when the hallway was crowded enough to feel safe and loud enough to hide intent. Voices overlapped. Lockers slammed. Shoes echoed against the floor. It looked like any other passing moment in the school day. She was at her locker, moving with the same unhurried precision she always did. Books in, books out, backpack open, then closed. Her attention stayed on the routine, not on the movement gathering behind her. He approached with confidence like he always did. Not rushed, not angry, comfortable. His presence alone shifted the space around him. A few students slowed without realizing why. Others glanced up, already expecting entertainment. It started with words. A comment about her being quiet again. A joke framed lightly enough to invite laughter. Someone nearby chuckled. Someone else looked away. The familiar pattern began to form. She didn't respond. That was when he stepped closer. Close enough that his shadow crossed her hands. Close enough that the space around her tightened. Still, she didn't turn. She finished what she was doing and shut the locker gently. "You never answer," he said, louder now. "It's like you're not even here." A few heads turned. A few phones were already half-raised, sensing something building. She took a step to leave. He moved with her. The crowd felt it before it saw it. The noise softened. Conversations thinned out. The hallway didn't go silent all at once. It faded, like sound being pulled away. "Relax," he said, smiling. "I'm just talking." Then his hand landed on her shoulder. Not violently, not enough to knock her back. Just enough to be deliberate. Just enough to claim space that wasn't his. That was the moment everything shifted. Her body still didn't react right away. But the air did. Students froze. Someone inhaled sharply. Another student whispered something that never finished forming. Phones came fully out now. She looked down at his hand. Then she looked up at him. For the first time, she met his eyes directly. There was no panic there. No anger. Just awareness. The kind that made people uncomfortable when they couldn't explain why. "Please remove your hand," she said quietly. He laughed, assuming the moment belonged to him. Assuming the crowd was on his side. Assuming this was still the same game. "What are you going to do?" he asked, pressing slightly harder. "Tell a teacher?" No one laughed this time. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't step back. But something in her stance changed, subtle enough that only a few noticed. Her weight settled. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing slowed. "I'm asking once," she said. The hallway was fully silent now. He glanced around, feeding off the attention, mistaking stillness for approval. He didn't see the warning in her posture. He only saw a quiet girl surrounded by witnesses. So he kept his hand there. And in that moment, public, recorded, undeniable, he crossed a line that couldn't be walked back. Because words could be ignored. Because silence could be misunderstood. But once his hand stayed where it didn't belong, there was no pretending this was harmless anymore. The crowd knew it. She knew it. And whether he realized it or not, everything had already changed. She didn't pull away. That was the first thing that confused him. Most people reacted the moment their space was invaded. They flinched. They snapped. They raised their voices. She did none of that. She stayed where she was, steady, as if his hand weighed nothing at all. The hallway felt suspended. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the phones being held up were still, their screens glowing in the quiet. She looked at his hand again, then back at his face. "You have 10 seconds, she said. Her voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't loud. It carried without effort, the way a simple instruction does when it isn't meant to be debated. He blinked, surprised more by the tone than the words. 10 seconds for what? He asked, smiling as laughter bubbled up in his chest. You counting now? A few students shifted uncomfortably. Someone in the back whispered that this felt different. But he didn't hear them. He was focused on the performance, on the attention, on proving that he was still in control. She inhaled slowly through her nose. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. Not in defeat but in release. Her stance widened by inches, subtle enough to look like nothing at all. Her weight settled evenly, as if she were grounding herself to the floor. 9, she said. The word landed softly. He laughed again, louder this time. This is weird, he said, glancing at the phones. You trying to scare me? She didn't answer. 8. Her breathing stayed steady. Even. Measured. Someone near the lockers swallowed hard. Someone else lowered their phone without realizing why. He rolled his eyes. You're not serious. 7. Her gaze never left him now. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't emotional. It was focused. The kind of focus people didn't expect from someone they thought they understood. He pressed his hand a little more, testing. Pushing. 6. The space between them felt smaller, though neither had moved. The air felt heavier. The hallway seemed too narrow all at once. 5. A few students took a step back. Not away from him, but away from her. He frowned, the smile starting to thin. What's your problem? He asked, though his voice had lost some of its ease. 4. Her posture was different now. Balanced. Ready. Calm in a way that didn't belong to fear. 3. He laughed again, but it sounded forced. You think this makes you look tough? 2. This time her voice dropped slightly. Not softer. Lower. Controlled. A phone slipped from someone's hand and clattered to the floor. No one bent to pick it up. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, to reclaim the moment. 1. She didn't move yet. The pause after the number was longer than all the seconds before it. Long enough for doubt to flicker across his face. Long enough for him to realize, too late, that this was no longer his stage. He tightened his grip instead of letting go. That was the mistake. Because while he was still laughing, still performing, still assuming the world worked the way it always had for him, she was already finished counting. It happened without warning, and without drama. There was no shout, no sudden burst of anger, no wild movement that gave anyone time to react. One moment, his hand was still on her shoulder. The next, the balance he thought he owned was gone. She moved with precision. Her body shifted first, a quiet adjustment that redirected his weight instead of meeting it. Her hand came up and closed around his wrist, not with force, but with certainty. At the same time, her other arm guided his elbow just enough to take away his structure. It was efficient, economical, almost gentle. He didn't understand what was happening until gravity made the explanation clear. His feet left the floor. The moment stretched in a way that didn't feel real. His body rotated, awkward and uncontrolled, the confidence draining from his face as the hallway seemed to tilt around him. There was no struggle, no resistance that mattered. Whatever strength he thought he had never came into play. He hit the ground hard. The sound echoed, sharp and final. The kind of sound that silenced even the bravest reactions. His breath left him in a rush as he stared up at the ceiling, eyes wide, trying to understand how the world had turned upside down in a single breath. She was already standing where she had been before, backpack still on, posture relaxed, expression unchanged. For a second, no one moved. Then the hallway exploded into noise. Gasps cut through the air. Someone swore under their breath. Phones tilted, scrambling to catch what had already happened. A few students laughed before realizing they shouldn't. Others just stared, frozen between disbelief and awe. He pushed himself up, face burning, eyes darting around. The attention he once controlled now pressed in on him from every direction. He tried to speak, but the words tangled with embarrassment. She looked down at him calmly. I asked you to remove your hand, she said. I gave you time. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't accuse. It simply stated a fact. He stood, unsteady, brushing dust from his clothes as if that could restore what he had lost. His friends didn't rush in. They didn't laugh. They didn't help. They just watched, unsure of where they stood now. The power had shifted. Not loudly, not violently, completely. The crowd saw it all at once. The months of assumptions collapsing in on themselves. The quiet girl wasn't weak. The polite girl wasn't submissive. The silence wasn't fear. It was restraint. She adjusted her backpack strap and stepped back, giving him space without fear. A few students moved aside instinctively, making room for her without thinking. No one reached for her. No one tested her. Because in those few seconds, the hallway learned something it hadn't known before. That strength didn't always announce itself, and confidence wasn't always loud. He avoided her eyes, and for the first time since anyone could remember, he didn't look bigger than the room around him. He looked small, and everyone knew exactly why. The story spread before the bell even rang. By the time students reached their next class, the hallway incident had already taken on a life of its own. Not exaggerated, not dramatized, just repeated over and over by people still trying to understand what they had seen. The quiet girl, the confident bully, the moment everything reversed. Teachers asked questions. Administrators reviewed footage. Phones were taken, then quietly returned when it became clear that nothing had been staged. The line had been crossed in public, and the response had been measured. She was called into the office later that day. Not in trouble, just asked to explain. She spoke calmly. She didn't embellish. She didn't defend herself beyond the facts. She explained that she had trained for years martial arts, discipline, control. That she had been taught to avoid conflict whenever possible. That physical response was always the last option, not the first. Her background surprised them. Years of early mornings, repetition, respect, learning when to step away and when not to, training that emphasized restraint as much as skill. A philosophy built around control, not dominance. She hadn't hidden it out of fear. She had simply never needed to share it. Word traveled quickly after that. Not with ridicule, but with curiosity. Students who had never spoken to her before nodded when they passed. Some apologized quietly for not speaking up sooner. Others asked questions not about the throw but about the discipline behind it. The school shifted in small ways. Conversations changed. People paid attention to moments they used to ignore. Silence was no longer invisible, it was noticed. As for him, the change was immediate. He moved differently through the halls now. Quieter, more careful. The laughter around him faded. Not because people feared him, but because the illusion was gone. Confidence built on unchecked control didn't survive exposure. He avoided her, not out of anger but out of understanding. For the first time, he had been forced to see someone he thought he understood. And he had been wrong. She returned to her routine. Same path, same pace, same calm presence. The difference was not in her posture, but in how the space around her responded. People gave room, not because of intimidation, but because of respect. She didn't seek attention. She didn't tell the story. She didn't correct the rumors or feed the narrative. She let it settle on its own, because she had never needed recognition. The lesson didn't belong to her alone. It belonged to everyone who had watched and learned something uncomfortable. That silence is not an invitation, politeness is not permission, and restraint is not weakness. Real strength had been there all along. It just didn't announce itself. It waited,